Ashley and Carley, New York show. Having a great time, come on, let's go. Traveling around the New York state on amazing adventures, place to place, with awesome guests always coming on, and a sidekick Dustin coming along. Subscribe to be updated on the show. Ashley and Carley, New York show, come on, let's go. It's the Ashley and Carley, New York show, let's go.
Hi, I'm Ashley.
And I'm Carley.
And I'm Dustin.
And
this is ANC New York.
Today, we're at the Hudson River Maritime Museum.
The museum gives a great perspective of maritime life.
It's located at 50 Roundel Landing in Kingston and is at the city's old waterfront.
I did some research, and the museum was founded in 1980 by local Hudson River enthusiasts, but didn't move to its current location until 1983. Hey Carley, did you know all sailors and fishermen are liars except you and me? Oh. And I'm not so sure about you.
Ha ha, very funny.
I do what I can.
Yeah, that was pretty fishy.
So what else have you got for us, Dustin?
I came to this place and met a wonderful woman named Sarah. Oh, and here she is.
Hey!
Hey guys, hello.
Hi.
Well, folks, this is Sarah. She's the education director here at the museum. How are you?
Great! Thanks for coming to visit us today.
Thanks for showing us around this wonderful place.
So I think we're going to start where we are right now and talking about Henry Hudson. Do you guys know anything about Henry Hudson?
Yeah.
He's that explorer dude, right?
Yeah, so Henry Hudson was a European explorer who was doing what a lot of Europeans, especially the British and the Dutch, were trying to do in the late 1500s and early 1600s. So he was trying to find something called the Northwest Passage. Do you guys know what that is?
A little bit.
Kinda. It's like past the north.
So the Northwest Passage was a shortcut, what they thought might be a shortcut over the top of the world, or in the northwest, around to get to Asia, right? So Europeans were looking to get this shortcut to Asia because Spain had control of the trade routes around Africa. So England and the Netherlands were both trying to find this shortcut, and Henry Hudson actually worked for both countries, first for the British, and then he was hired by the Dutch. He finds what we now know as the Hudson River on his third voyage, and when he gets to what is now New York Harbor, he thinks, oh my gosh, look at this giant river. This might totally be the Northwest Passage. I think I finally found it after like 4 years of looking.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did he name it the Hudson River when he found out it was only a river? Or did somebody else?
He did not name it the Hudson River. A lot of people think he was, kind of full of himself and named it after himself, but it was actually known as the Great North River because if you look at a map, it goes almost straight north up into the heart of New York. And then also the Dutch, in their first period of settlement, called it the Mauritius River. And it didn't become known as the Hudson River until the mid-1800s, when people were starting getting interested again in that early American history. So Henry Hudson is going up the river. He interacts with all kinds of different native people along the way. We have this little exhibit about our 3 main native nations in the Hudson Valley. So from here in Kingston, south to New Jersey was the Lenape Nation. North of here on both sides of the river, up to about the Albany area, was the Mohican. And then of course you guys have probably heard about the Iroquois Confederacy, who were in the Mohawk River Valley. So he didn't really interact as much with the Iroquois, but another early European explorer, Samuel de Champlain, did, which is Lake Champlain, is named after him. But Henry interacted with both tribes in the Lenape Nation and the Mohicans.
What did he interact with them? Like, were they aggressive? Were they peaceful?
So the some of the tribes living closer to what is now New York City, they had some not so great encounters with. But by the time they got up to the Albany area, the Mohicans, they actually feasted with them, right? They basically had them over, which is kind of an interesting thing because Henry Hudson's crew, they had both English and Dutch, so you had 2 languages in Henry Hudson's crew, and then, of course, they didn't speak the same language as all these people they were meeting, so I like to kind of think about what would those dinners have been like, trying to communicate with these people who, these Europeans are totally strange to the native people, and the native people don't have anything in common with the Europeans, so trying to communicate.
Probably a game of charades.
Yeah. Probably lots of goodwill gifts and like putting aside weapons to know that you're peaceful. know, but he's a little bit paranoid. So Henry Hudson kept journals, and his first mate, Robert Jewett, who was Dutch, also kept journals, which is really unusual for that time period. Not everybody, in fact, very few people in this time were literate, right, that could read and write. So to have 2 journal records is really great. However, Henry Hudson's journals have been lost to time. We only have excerpts from his journals that were published in other books after his final and fatal journey. So you guys ready to see the rest of the museum?
Yeah.
All right, come with me. Okay, so this next section of the museum is one of our temporary exhibits. It's called The Modeler's Craft, and it's all about different model Hudson River boats. So like these boats we have here, this is kind of like our timeline of boats. So we start out with Henry Hudson's ship, which is an ocean-going Dutch vessel. And then next we have a type of sailboat called a sloop. You guys ever heard that word before?
No.
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 It sounds like another word for goo.
It's not. A sloop is a type of single-masted sailing boat, and they were used most often as cargo. So they're really beamy, we say in the maritime world. That means a boat is really wide. It's kind of fat, right? Kind of tubby boat. They're beamy, that means they can hold a lot of cargo. So we've got a lot of other Hudson River sloops. You can see them behind us here with their sails up. And those were like the workhorse of the Hudson River. That was how stuff got around on the Hudson River for a really long time. And then in the early 1800s, a guy by the name of Robert Fulton basically made a steamboat that was commercially viable. So he's not the first person to make a steamboat, but he's the first one to make one that doesn't blow up or break in half or sink, because those were all problems that steamboats had at that time. So that's an example of a steamboat right there.
So which of these are the newest?
So the newest one here is our last one, the tugboat. Tugboats were also initially steam powered, but they, unlike the earlier steamboats, which have 2 paddle wheels on either side, tugboats have a propeller on the stern and the back of the boat. That's how they're powered. And that kind of tugboat, that style of tugboat starts in the 1870s. And the Hudson River was like this huge transportation highway, both for people and stuff. So boats were really important for moving things around, especially before we have railroads, right? So there's 2 railroads going down either side of the Hudson River. West side is freight, and the east side is for people, right? That's how you guys came up here today? On the train?
We drive here.
Oh, all right, you drove. All right, that's okay. But lots of people still come up to this area on Metro North, right? But before there were trains, people got around on boats on the Hudson River.
This kind of looks like a mini Titanic.
A little bit. They're not quite the same. Titanic was an ocean liner, right? They're big steam-powered cruise ships, right? They're for carrying people across oceans, so they're huge. Hudson River boats tend to be not quite as big, but like if you look at some of the boats over there, they're about 5 stories tall, and some of our biggest passenger boats on the Hudson River could take up to 5,000 people at a time.
Whoa, that's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. And there were multiple boats traveling on the Hudson River at the same time. So thousands of people would travel up and down the Hudson River on these boats. Of course, only in the summertime, right?
Why
Because
not?
what happens in the winter?
I mean, it gets
This?
cold, but what about the fall and the spring?
They could go in the fall and the spring too. Yep.
And
But
then
so
the
you have to have warm weather. Nowadays, the Coast Guard actually takes their icebreakers all the way up to Albany, and they break the ice on the Hudson River if the Hudson River freezes. So now we have boat traffic year round. But in the time period, they didn't have that. So once the river froze, that was the end of the season. So welcome guys to our lighthouse exhibit. This is all about Hudson River lighthouses. There are only 7 lighthouses left on the Hudson River, and this is not one of them. This lighthouse behind us, this replica model, is of the Rondout Lighthouse, the second of 3 Rondout lighthouses. The third one is still there. I always like to say it's like the 3 little pigs. The first one was made out of wood, the second one was made out of stone, and the third one was made out of brick. So that one is still there, but this one is not. This lighthouse had a female lighthouse keeper. Her name was Catherine Murdoch, and Murdochs were lighthouse keepers from 1857 until 1923. Catherine was lighthouse keeper for 50 years, from 1857 until 1907, and then her son James took over. But this lighthouse was abandoned. And it was abandoned because the mouth of Rondout Creek, which is the body of water that this museum is on, the Hudson River is about a mile that way. The mouth of Rondout Creek was changed in the 1870s and 80s. They built these huge walls out into the river. And when they got done, the walls looked like this. And the stone lighthouse, the one behind me here, was all the way back here. So the new mouth of the creek is all the way out here. So sailors and steamboat captains petitioned the government to build a new lighthouse at the real mouth of the creek, which they did. What do you guys think happened to this one? Not by water. Very good idea, though. It's not there anymore.
They knocked it down.
So this lighthouse was abandoned when the new one was built, and in the 1950s, the roof collapsed. And government officials thought that it was a hazard. You know, people would go out there to fish, teenagers would go out there to get in trouble. So they thought, we got to get rid of this building. And this is the 1950s, so people didn't really care about historic preservation like we do today. So they decided they had to get rid of it, but it's out in the middle of the water. You can't just drive a truck with a wrecking ball out there. So what they did is they blew it up. What? They filled it with dynamite and collapsed it down into the basement. And this base down here, this stone base, is still out in the creek, and you can still see it today.
How are the lighthouses powered?
So lighthouses before electricity used oil lamps that had to be cleaned and filled every day. So the lighthouse keeper's job was mostly just to maintain the lantern. So they would have to lug these big oil cans all the way up to the top of the tower to fill the oil lamps, and then they would clean the lenses. They'd have to clean the outside windows of the tower to make sure that that light could get out there to warn sailors where to go or where not to go. So Rondout Lighthouse is a where to go lighthouse because it's marking the entrance to Rondout Creek, right? There's boats coming in and out of the creek where the creek meets the Hudson, so you want to let people...
Action.
Do you guys have any other questions?
No.
No. All right, let's go to the next section.
So, what's this?
So this is one of my favorite things in the exhibit. It's this giant wheel. Do you guys know what it's for? Any ideas?
Steering machine.
It is. It is a huge steering wheel. Right, it's from a Hudson River steamboat called the Alexander Hamilton. That was the last of the Hudson River steamboats. And if you picture over there, Dustin, can you see which steering wheel the captain is using?
The small one?
Right. They're using power steering because these steamboats were hundreds of feet long, right? And they had rudders that were super big. And so they used the engine to help them steer the boat, just like a power steering, just like a car does. Have you guys ever been in a car when there was no power steering?
No.
No? So what happens is when you try to turn the wheel, it gets super hard, right? Because the engine is not helping you turn your car, which is hundreds and hundreds of pounds. It's just you. So the same thing could happen with a steamboat. So you had to have a backup steering wheel. And the reason why it's so big, you guys remember simple machines in school, right? Learning about levers and stuff. So each of these spokes on the wheel is like a lever, right? And this is the fulcrum. And so the longer your lever and the bigger your wheel, the more torque you can get to turn the wheel. So on a steamboat, if the steam engine goes out and you're chugging along on the river, and all of a sudden, you know, your engine breaks down or whatever, what happens to the boat?
It stops.
Does it stop? Sinks? It's got momentum, right? It keeps going. So you have to be able to steer even when you don't have an engine. And that's
Like where it came from?
So this wheel is the only backup steering wheel that the Alexander Hamilton had, but a lot of other big steamboats like this would have these giant backup wheels. Unfortunately, this is the only one we got. So.
And did you guys find it at like the bottom of the ocean or?
So we're a museum, so most of our artifacts have been donated to us by people whose families have just saved them over the years, or people who find them in farms or whatever. Occasionally, if we can afford it, we'll buy really important stuff. But I would say probably 90% of our collection has been donated to us.
Action.
By ordinary people like.
So, is this like the movie Frozen?
It's exactly like the movie Frozen. So what we have here is our ice harvesting exhibit. You guys remember in the beginning of Frozen, what are they doing?
Harvesting.
So if you wanted to get ice, you had to harvest it in the wintertime, which is exactly what they did on the Hudson River. So they would use equipment like this, these big saws and cutting plows drawn by horses to cut out these huge blocks of ice. They would store them in giant ice houses that were all up and down the river. And then in the summertime, when everybody wanted ice, right, and you want to keep your stuff cold, they would load it onto barges, go down the river, and then when they got to big cities, an iceman would come with his cart, his wagon, take all these giant cubes of ice, and then take it to your house. It was a delivery service that would come to your house, and the iceman would take one tongs like this, put the ice up on his shoulder, it's really heavy, go into your house, and put it in your ice box. Have you guys ever heard that term before?
Yeah, I learned it in school once.
Yeah, what's an ice box?
Fridge.
It's like a fridge, right? So before we have electricity, you had this box and you'd put a giant thing of ice at the top, and the cool air would come down, and sometimes the ice would melt and this cold water would come down the sides of the box. And in that box, you could put your food and it would keep it cold. But people also used what was called natural ice, right? Because you got it from the natural environment. It wasn't artificially made. They would use it to make ice cream. They would use it to keep drinks cold, all that stuff that you want to do to try and keep cool in the summertime before you had air conditioning.
Wouldn't the ice melt on the barges and on the way to the houses?
So that's part of why you have ice houses. So they would pack the ice solid in these giant houses, and then they would use like sawdust or hay or other insulation to try and keep the ice cold, keep it cold in there, keep it from melting. And later on, toward the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of those ice houses had a kind of a cooling system where they would collect all that cold melted water from the ice that did melt, and they would pump it through pipes in the walls, and that would act sort of like a refrigerator, and it would keep the ice cold. But you did lose, there was expected, you might lose as much as 50% of the ice you harvested on your way to wherever you're going. Because they took ice all over the world. There was ice going to the Caribbean, there was ice going to India, places like that, from New York and Massachusetts, which was pretty cool.
And they didn't have that kind of mechanism, or like the water from the already melted ice inside the boat, inside of the barges, inside the boats.
Right, so you would pack them with insulating material, just like in the ice house. But yeah, you're gonna lose part of your ice wherever you go. So ice being close together, you guys know, like the fuller your freezer is, the fuller your fridge is, the easier it is for it to stay cold, right? It doesn't have to work as hard.
Who knew that ice harvesting could be so interesting?
Right? And this is here in Kingston. This was a huge industry because the Hudson River has tides, right? It's an estuary, so there's salt water that comes up from the ocean, and the water in the tides goes all the way up to Albany, but the salt line stops around Newburgh, Poughkeepsie area. So Kingston, the river is nice and wide here, and it was above the salt line, right? So you get nice freshwater ice. All right, so we've learned a lot of cool stuff about the Hudson River. Are you guys ready for something fun?
Yes.
All right, so why don't we take you and you can get on this thing behind me, which is a tugboat pilot house replica that we have put together, and this is how people would have steered big steam-powered tugboats. So I see you're already using our pilot wheel, right? We learned about the Alexander Hamilton pilot wheel. That's a much smaller one. But what's happening when you turn it?
The arrow is moving across the numbers.
The arrow is moving across the numbers. There's little hash marks of numbers on the front of that pilot wheel, and those are to tell the pilot how many degrees to port or starboard the rudder is moving on the boat.
Why are there numbers down here but not up here?
Because you can't turn the rudder all the way around in a circle, right? You can only go so far on your rudder when you're turning.
And also, why are there numbers in the first place?
So that is to tell the pilot how far in each direction the rudder is going, either port or starboard. Do you guys know what port and starboard are?
No. Sides of the ship.
The sides of the ship. So port is the left side of the ship if you are facing forward, and starboard is the right side. And even if you're facing backwards or toward the stern of the boat, they're the same side. Port is always port, and starboard is always starboard. Do you guys know how they got their names?
Explorers, maybe?
Close. It's actually based on very ancient boat terms. So the starboard is a corruption of the word steerboard. So way back in ancient times, people who had boats, their rudder was not like attached to the back of the boat. It was actually just a board that went down the outside of the boat on the side. So your steerboard went down one side, and you came into port on the opposite side, because what would happen if you came into dock or into port with your board down the outside if you're coming against the dock? What could happen? You could break your steerboard, and that would be like a disaster, because how can you steer your boat without a steerboard? So that's how they got their names as the side of the boat. One side was for the steerboard, and the other side was where you came into port. Do you know how you remember?
How?
Port and left both have what? 4 letters. That is the easiest way to remember. Port and left both have 4 letters.
And what are these red and green kind of lights for? I guess?
Right, that's great. So that's also related to port and starboard. Port is always a red light, and starboard is always a green light. And so if you ever see a boat out on the water, you'll see that they have red and green lights on top. And that is so boats that are coming the opposite way can tell which direction you're facing. So if your port and starboard lights match up, that means you're going the same direction. But if they're switched, that means the boat is coming toward you, and you might want to move out of the way, right? So you don't crash. They're used on navigational buoys in the Hudson River. And just like when you're in a car, you always keep the center line to your left. You always keep the red buoy to your port, right? So that's how you know which direction you can go in the channel.
And I'm guessing this whole mechanism has something to do with those 2 lights?
That is a very good observation, but it actually doesn't. So this thing in the middle is a compass, right? And how do compasses work?
Points north.
It points north. How does it do that? How does it know to point north? There's a magnet. And if you have a compass on a tugboat, what are tugboats usually made out of? They're made out of steel. So if you're on a giant steel thing and you have a magnet, your magnet might do things you don't want it to do, right? So these big iron balls here, you could adjust them to adjust your compass and make sure it was pointing true north.
Oh wow, there's more than boats than just decks and, underneath the boat.
Right, it's kind of a science. Learning how to navigate a boat is kind of a science. What about that thing that's next to you? What do you think that is?
It's like something to call the crew?
It is. So before we had radios, you had speaking tubes. So on a steamboat, there's a pilot who steers, and then there's a crew of people down in the engine room who run the steam engine. And the engine crew are the ones who decide or who can change how fast you're going and in what direction, either forwards or backwards. And all the pilot can do is steer. So they have to talk to each other all the time. And Dustin, if you look on your side, there's a little lever there. If you pull it up and let go, what happens? A bell rings. That's an engine room gong. So that's how the pilot would get the attention of the engine crew. It's really loud because it's really loud in an engine room. He would get their attention and they would know to go to the speaking tube, and then the pilot could give instructions to the speaking tube. So maybe he would say, half speed ahead, right? So that would tell the engine crew to slow the engine down to half speed but keep it going forwards. Or maybe he'd say full reverse if they're gonna run into something. So they would throw it in reverse and full power so they could back off of whatever they were gonna hit. So they had to have a good communication system. It's kind of like if you were driving a car and you were steering and someone else was controlling the accelerator and the brake. That'd be pretty hard, right?
Yeah.
Cars go a lot faster than tugboats, so tugboats are a little bit easier to work with that on.
Where does this lead to?
So it goes down underneath and there's another speaking tube in back.
Oh, wait, so if I did blue.
Right, so if Dustin goes in the back and listens to that speaking tube and you whisper in that one, he'll be able to hear you.
Hello.
That was a nice whisper. Yeah.
Whispering.
All right, do you guys have any other questions about anything?
No.
All right, you were a great audience. Thanks for listening, and I hope you visit again soon sometime.
We hope so too. That was a great day at the museum, right guys?
Yeah.
Hey, does anybody know what time it is?
11:30 a.m.
No, silly, it's time for the question of the day.
The question of the day!
The question of the day. Let's head out to our reporter on the streets.
Ashley, hey Carly, hello Dustin. I'm Sarah Venter for ANC New York, out to ask the question of the day. Since we're here at the Hudson River Maritime Museum, the question of the day is, do you ever get... Hi, what's your name?
Rachel?
Do you ever get seasick?
Yeah, I feel pretty seasick.
Well, now that that incident's over, we have another person to ask the question of the day to. Hi, what's your name?
Tashay.
Tashay, do you ever get seasick?
No, I don't.
Good, I don't want to live through that again. Hi, what's your name?
Sarah.
Nice to meet you, Sarah. Do you ever get seasick?
Only when the weather is bad.
Well, that's all we have time for today. I'm Sarah Venter for ANC New York. Kicking it back to you guys.
Thanks, Sarah. What a wonderful job.
She's adorable, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And we expect more great questions from her. That reminds me, if you guys have any questions that you'd like us to ask, send it to us.
Yeah, send it to us.
At
Ashley and Carley, New York. Well, we should get to our special guest today. She's from your neck of the woods, Ashley. All the way from Westchester County, Lily Peterson.
Hey Ashley, hey Carly, it's me, Lily Peterson from Westchester County, Mamaroneck, New York. I'm 13 years old and I'm going to be playing Riptide on the ukulele. I was scared of dentists in the dark. I was scared of pretty girls and starting conversations. All my friends are turning green. You're the magician's assistant in their dreams. Oh, and they come unstuck. Lady, running down to the riptide, taken away by the dark side. I wanna be your left-hand man. I love you when you're singing that song, and I got a lump in my throat, 'cause you're gonna sing the words wrong. There's this movie that I think you like. This guy decides to quit his job and move to New York City. This cowboy's running from himself. She's been living on the highest shelf. Oh, and they come unstuck. Lady, running down to the riptide, taken away by the dark side. I wanna be your left-hand man. I love you when you're singing that song, and I got a lump in my throat, 'cause you're gonna sing the words wrong. Take it away, Dustin.
That was amazing.
A wonderful performance.
I sure can pick them.
So if you have a song that you want to sing for us,
Or a dance you want to do for us.
Or a comedy skit you'd like to put on our show, please send it to us
at ashleyandcarleynewyork@yahoo.com. Well, that's our show. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Carly.
Hold on. Don't you guys want to see the outside bell and play area?
Yeah,
Why not?
let's go. Well, that was fun.
I had a blast. What about you, Sarah?
I loved it. Thanks for inviting me.
I told you there was more, but now it's time to go.
I'm Ashley.
And I'm Carly.
And
this
this
is
is
ANC
ANC
New
New
York.
York. We'd like to thank the Hudson River Maritime Museum.
As well as the staff who works there, especially Sarah, who was our tour guide.
And we'd like to thank our reporter on the street, Sarah Venter.
Bye!